$40 million in cash, 35 million euros, 19 pounds of gold, all of it seized by Hungary from a Ukrainian bank on a public road 14 days before the election. And then Orbán walked out of the EU summit and said 4 words that stopped the room. We have more cards. Not a threat. Not a negotiating position. A statement of fact. Delivered to 26 leaders who had spent the previous 90 minutes attacking him in the harshest terms any EU summit has produced in a generation. He stood up, walked out, posted a video on X, and said, "Attempts to pressure or blackmail Hungary cannot succeed." Brussels called it unacceptable. Washington called it sovereignty. And the gold is still in Budapest. Here is what mainstream media will not put in the same frame. Let's go. The armored vehicles were stopped on March 6th. 2 cash transport trucks registered to a Ukrainian bank were moving through Hungarian territory. Hungarian authorities seized them as part of what they described as a money laundering investigation. The contents: $40 million in cash, 35 million euros in cash, and 19.8 pounds of gold bullion. The total value, approximately $80 million. Moving through Hungary, without prior notification to Hungarian authorities. Orbán's government did not stop there. Within days, they announced that intelligence analysis of the seized assets suggested the money was intended to be funneled to Peter Magyar's Tisza party, the opposition movement leading in every independent poll ahead of April 12th. Magyar called it fabricated. His supporters called it a political provocation. EU officials called for calm. But here is the detail that nobody in Western media connected. The seizure happened on March 6th. The EU summit happened on March 19th. Between those 2 dates, every major EU institution, the Commission, the Parliament, the Council, was producing statements, resolutions, and diplomatic pressure operations against Orbán. The wiretapping story dropped. The Reuters quotes about EU diplomats hoping for his defeat were published. The 5-step Brussels plan circulated again in Politico. And through all of it, Hungary was sitting on $80 million in seized Ukrainian assets. That is not a coincidence of timing. That is a negotiating position. Now, let's go to the summit itself, because what happened in that room on March 19th has to be understood in full, not in the fragments that made the evening news. 26 leaders sat at the table. Orbán sat outside it, literally. The seating arrangement at the EU Council placed him removed from the main table during the portion where Zelensky addressed the room via video conference. The image went everywhere, Orbán on the periphery, watching, while Zelensky spoke to the assembled leaders of Europe. The discussion, according to multiple diplomatic sources, was described as fiery. EU Council President Antonio Costa criticized the rhetoric from both sides. But he also noted that Hungary was putting conditions on the table, specifically the safety of oil transit. While Russia continued striking Ukraine, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz was direct. He said all 27 member states must respect decisions made together. The guiding principle of the European Union is one of loyalty and reliability. But here is what Merz did not say. The decision Hungary is being asked to honor. The €90 billion loan package for Ukraine was originally approved with Hungary's agreement. Orbán voted yes in December. Then the Druzhba pipeline was disrupted in January. And Orbán said, no oil, no money. That sequence matters. He is not blocking something he never agreed to. He is withdrawing agreement over a condition that changed after he gave it. The oil pipeline, which Ukraine says was damaged by a Russian drone strike, and which Orbán says was deliberately sabotaged to pressure him, is the hinge on which everything turns. The EU offered this week to fund repairs to the pipeline. A technical team was sent to Kyiv. Kyiv accepted the offer. But the inspection cannot begin until Ukrainian security services grant clearance to the EU technical team. That clearance has not come. So the situation is this. Hungary demands oil. The EU agrees to fund pipeline repairs. Ukraine agrees to let a team inspect it. But the inspection is pending Ukrainian security clearance. And Orbán continues the veto. He said it himself, departing the summit. If there is oil, there will be money. 5 words. Clearer than anything produced in 90 minutes of fiery discussion. Now let's talk about the card Orbán revealed that nobody expected. After the summit, speaking to journalists in Brussels, Orbán disclosed something that had not been previously reported. He said his government has not yet used one of its most significant pieces of leverage, Ukraine's electricity supply. 40% of Ukraine's electricity, he said, passes through Hungarian territory. Hungary has not touched that yet. He said it plainly. We have other tools as well. Let that number sit. 40% of Ukraine's electricity supply routes through Hungary, in the middle of a war, while Hungary is being financially strangled by Brussels for blocking a loan, while $80 million in Ukrainian assets sit seized in Budapest, and while EU leaders are publicly hoping for his electoral defeat in 14 days. This is not a man who is losing. This is a man who has been methodically building leverage for months and revealing it piece by piece. The EU's response to the electricity disclosure was silence. No statement from the Commission. No response from Callas. No reaction from the Council. Silence. Because there is no good response available, the treaties do not give the EU a mechanism to compel Hungary to allow Ukrainian electricity transit. It is Hungarian infrastructure. It is Hungarian sovereign territory, and Orbán knows it. Now let's connect this to what Bloomberg reported yesterday. The headline said Orbán's campaign is showing cracks. The story cited rising opposition support, fresh scandals, and confrontations at open-air campaign events. In the western city of Győr, Orbán was met by voters shouting slogans against Fidesz. His campaign has shifted from scripted indoor events to open-air speeches. A tactical change that suggests internal polling shows weakness. The independent polls give Magyar a lead of 8 to 12 points. Government-aligned polling shows Fidesz ahead. The gap between those numbers, 20 points in some cases, is not measurement error. It is a signal that someone is measuring something other than the actual electorate. What is also true, Fidesz has won 8 consecutive by-elections since 2022. Magyar's TISA party has not contested a single one of them. The track record of actual votes belongs entirely to one side. Open-air rallies showing confrontational crowds are not the same as ballot boxes. But here's the thing that this video is not going to tell you. We do not know what happens on April 12th. Nobody does. And anyone who tells you they do is selling something. What we can tell you is what the stakes are. And the stakes are larger than any single election. If Orbán wins. The EU has already told you what it will do. Change the working methods. Exclude Hungary from certain meetings. Accelerate Article 7. Find new mechanisms to road around the veto. The $20 billion nuclear deal with Westinghouse becomes a permanent counterweight to Brussels' financial pressure. And Hungary enters the next 7-year EU budget negotiation holding $80 million in seized Ukrainian assets, a potential electricity leverage card, and an American security guarantee. If Magyar wins, he inherits every single one of these pressure points. The seized assets must be resolved. The electricity question does not disappear. The $20 billion nuclear agreement is signed and running. The Druzhba pipeline is still disrupted. And his promise to align Hungary with Brussels on Ukraine funding meets an immediate test. Does he unfreeze the $90 billion loan before the pipeline is repaired? If yes, he gives up Orbán's leverage immediately. If no, he is doing the same thing Orbán was doing, with different branding. The EU assumes a Magyar government will simply reverse course. That assumption has never been tested. Magyar himself has been carefully ambiguous on the details. He has promised European alignment. He has not promised to abandon every Hungarian national interest that Orbán has been defending. The seized gold does not belong to either candidate. It belongs to a Ukrainian bank. Whatever government takes office on April 13th will have to decide what to do with $80 million in cash and bullion that is currently sitting in Hungarian state custody as evidence in a money laundering case. Now let's look at the 90 billion figure one more time, because the number that defines this entire story is not the 40 million in the armored trucks. It is not the 80 million total in seized assets. It is not even the 22 billion in EU funds frozen against Hungary. It is 360 billion. That is the figure that appears in internal EU discussions about Ukraine's share of the next 7-year budget cycle. Hungary's parliament voted 142 to 28 against Ukraine funding, against EU accession for Ukraine, against any path that puts European taxpayer money into Kyiv without conditions. 80% of the Hungarian parliament, not one man, a democratic mandate. Orbán threatened directly at the summit. Veto the entire next 7-year EU budget if it contains financial aid for Ukraine. No budget means no EU funding for any member state. No cohesion funds. No agricultural subsidies. No structural investments. The EU machinery stops. For every country, not just Hungary. That is the card he has not played yet. The electricity was one card. The budget veto is another. The seized assets are a third. The Westinghouse nuclear deal is a fourth. The Russian oil waiver from Washington is a fifth. He said it himself. We have a lot of cards in our hands. I don't think it's worth picking a fight with Hungary. 26 leaders sat in that room. None of them found a response to that sentence. Because the response would require admitting something the EU cannot publicly admit, that a member state with 10 million people, holding legal treaty rights, backed by an American nuclear deal and a Russian oil waiver, sitting on Ukrainian gold, controlling 40% of Ukraine's electricity transit, and threatening the entire 7-year EU budget, cannot simply be pressured into compliance. They can hope he loses on April 12th. Reuters told us they do. They are counting on it. But counting on an election result is not a policy, it is a prayer. And if the prayer does not come true on April 12th, Brussels will wake up on April 13th with every single one of those cards still on the table. Mainstream media is showing you the summit anger, the bilateral pressure, the polling numbers, the confrontations in Győr. They are not showing you the cards, all of them, in the same frame, at the same time. That is exactly what this channel does. Subscribe. 14 days. Every card matters now.